The following episode contains disturbing descriptions of child abuse and sexual violence and may not be suitable for everyone. It also contains coarse language, adult themes, and content of a violent and disturbing nature. Listener discretion is advised.
We've all been brought up on TV crime shows and police procedurals. In about 45 minutes, a crime is committed, evidence is gathered, suspects identified and arrested, sent to trial, and either convicted or acquitted. That's TV. In real life, though, it doesn't work that way. When we learn of a horrific crime, it occupies the news cycle for days, weeks, and even months as the case plays out. But then, inevitably, something else comes along, and we move on before the story of that crime is complete. Has the case gone cold? Did anyone ever get arrested? Was there a conviction? If so, what happened at the trial? Did anybody go to jail? And if someone is in prison, what's their status? In short, was justice served? Much of the time, we don't know because no one ever follows up. And if they do, these new details get lost in the constant deluge of information that comes up every single day. I'm Alan Cross, and this is episode 67 of Uncharted Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry. And over the life of this show, we've talked about dozens of cases, most of which have been resolved. But some of these tales just keep on going. Time for some updates, resolutions, and conclusions to some very infamous crimes from the world of music. Media coverage of crimes tend to be sensational and short. There's always some new case to cover, some arrest to discuss, some trial to follow. But even the most wild crime stories get lost in the noise. Let's follow up on a few of them and, wherever possible, offer a conclusion and close the books on them. Some have been covered on this show. Others are old music-related and music-adjacent crimes where there have been developments and resolutions. Let's start with a really old one, the murder conviction of Claudine Longette. She was a French singer who was once married to American entertainer Andy Williams. She was often a musical guest on American variety shows back in the 60s. Longette was also an actress who appeared on a bunch of American dramas and sitcoms in the 1960s and 70s, as well as several movies. Longette recorded 5 albums for A&M Records between 1966 and 1970. Her biggest hit was a 1968 album entitled Claudine, which reached number 11 on the Billboard charts. Longette circulated in some interesting circles. She was friends with Robert F. Kennedy, brother of JFK. In fact, the night he was assassinated in 1968, his plans were to join Longette and Andy Williams for a quiet night following that speech in California. In 1975, Longette and Williams divorced, and she moved on. Her next relationship was with an Olympic skier named Spider Savage. He'd been in the '68 Olympics and was a world pro ski racing champion in 1971 and 1972. The man was a star in the sport. And this is where the crime comes in. Savage met Claudine at a skiing competition in California in 1972. When she separated from Williams, they became a thing, and before long they were living together. On March 21, 1976, Savage arrived at his home in Aspen, Colorado after a day of training on the slopes. He talked with a buddy and made plans for dinner, and then he went for a shower. But that shower never happened. Savage was shot in the abdomen while in the bathroom. The wound was severe and he lost a lot of blood. He died on the way to hospital with Longette beside him in the ambulance. So what happened? They seemed like a perfectly happy couple. Claudine's story is that he was showing her how to use a Luger handgun and it went off accidentally. Cops found this suspicious and arrested her on a charge of murder. The case went to trial, and it was a sensational celebrity trial. Media reports were filed daily from the courtroom. Her former husband, Andy Williams, covered all her legal fees. The jury found out that without warrants, cops took a blood sample from Longette and confiscated her diary. The gun had a defective safety. The firing mechanism was overly lubricated. There were questions about what the autopsy actually revealed regarding the location of the wound and in what position Spider Savage's body would have had to been in for him to die the way Longette said he did. The jury also never heard about the tiny amount of cocaine detected in her bloodstream, nor were they read passages from her diary that seemed to indicate that she and Spider's relationship had grown rocky. Because of these legal errors, the condition of the gun, and other unanswered questions, there was no hope of a guilty verdict. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury came back with a guilty charge of misdemeanor criminal negligence. Longette was given 2 years probation, fined $250, and ordered to spend 30 days in jail. She paid the fine, served her time on weekends, and was set free. This angered Spider Savage's family, and they filed a $1.3 million civil lawsuit against her in May of 1977. That was settled out of court 2 years later. The big provision was that Longette could never, ever, ever tell her story in any way. The trial was such a sensation that the Rolling Stones wrote a song about her entitled Claudine, but it remained unreleased until it appeared on a 2011 reissue of Some Girls. The case ruined Longette's entertainment career. She married her defense attorney and lived out her life in Aspen, Colorado, and she died on May 14, 2026, never revealing what actually happened that day, and this case is now closed forever. Here's another murder that's been resolved after decades. Ron Beauty, the stage name of Rodney Barger, was the singer for a Detroit hardcore punk band called Cold as Life. On September 15, 1993, he was killed, shot while sleeping in his home. The motive? Unknown. He left behind a fiancée and a baby daughter. His roommate, Richard Werstein, was a suspect. He was arrested a few days later with orders to appear in court at a future date to answer his not guilty plea to second-degree murder and firearms charges. He never showed, and a warrant was issued in June 1994. But he just disappeared. Local authorities described him as a ghost. The case remained cold for decades, but then an odd break. On April 29, 2026, he was at a dog park in Panama City, Panama. Cops asked him for ID, and what he gave them, the name Joe Maceo, was fake. They took him to the police station, had him fingerprinted, and that proved that he was, in fact, Richard Werstein. It turns out that he had entered Panama illegally in 2005 and lived under a series of fake names. He'd even been arrested multiple times. In the 90s, he faced charges involving arson and a concealed weapon, but somehow got away. In 1999, he suffered some very bad gunshot wounds to the abdomen during a confrontation with police in Arizona. He was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and disorderly conduct. And he allegedly worked as a con man using different identities. Each time, though, no one ever figured out who he really was. When the U.S. Marshal Service took over the case in 2022, they were able to trace him to Central America. He got a job as a tool salesman and was doing some acting in a local theater. When he was arrested, Werstein confessed and was extradited to the U.S. to face second-degree murder and felony firearms charges. Meanwhile, Cold as Life, the band, still exists.
Ron died before they recorded their debut album, but in the years since, the group has released several songs based on his murder, like the title track of the band's 1999 album, Born to Land Hard, which contains the line, "You're 23 and dead. The promise will be kept." When we come back, more resolutions to crimes of the past. We will revisit the killing of Jam Master Jay of Run DMC. After decades of not knowing what really happened, there was a development that got us closer to the truth.
Early in the evening of Wednesday, October 30th, 2002, Jam Master Jay, the DJ for Run DMC, was shot dead in the lounge of his recording studio in Jamaica, Queens. He was shot once in the head and once in the torso, and then the killer just walked away. Jam Master Jay's murder remained shrouded in mystery and controversy for nearly 25 years. It was one of the longest unsolved murders in the history of hip-hop. It took until 2020 to lay any charges. Why? Well, witnesses disagreed on what happened. Leads were not followed up. There were issues with security cameras and the evidence they might have provided. Investigative journalists came up empty. Stories emerged about how a drug deal had gone wrong. There was a Netflix documentary that didn't really have any answers, and if someone knew what happened, they didn't snitch. We do know that Jam Master Jay had run into financial issues, and despite having a reputation as a clean-living guy, had become mixed up in a scheme to distribute 10 kilos of cocaine in a scheme to help him clear up some substantial tax debts. His contact was a dealer known as Uncle. The value of the coke was about $250,000. But because Jay allegedly didn't pay for the drugs on time, Uncle ordered the hit. Oh, there were suspects. The first was Carl Jordan Jr., known on the street as Nold. He was Jam Master Jay's godson and just 18 years old at the time. Some eyewitnesses testified that he was the one who pulled the trigger in the studio that night. The second suspect was Ronald Washington, also known as Tinard. He was a longtime friend of Jam Master Jay, but somehow got mixed up in his killing. Witnesses testified that he remained in the doorway of the studio with a gun while Jordan went about his business with Jay. The third suspect was Jay Bryant, a lookout man who allowed Jordan and Washington into the studio through a fire escape door. So, where are we now? I can tell you that indictments were filed against Carl Jordan and Ronald Washington in 2020. The story was that they'd been cut out of the coke distribution deal by Jay and that his murder was in retaliation for that. Both pleaded not guilty, and their trials began on January 29, 2024. On February 27, 2024, Jordan was found guilty on federal charges of murdering Jam Master Jay while trafficking in narcotics. That same day, February 27, 2024, Ronald Washington was convicted of being an accomplice in the murder. Cops had been looking at him for years. In 2007, he was declared an accomplice in the murder. And in 2024, he was finally convicted as that accomplice. And even when Jordan's murder conviction was overturned, Washington's sentence held up. As for Jay Bryant, he ended up pleading guilty to a firearm-related murder charge regarding the death of Jay in April 2025. His plea sent him to jail for between 15 and 20 years. So we're done, right? Case closed. No. Remember a few seconds ago I used the word overturned? On December 19, 2025, a judge overturned Carl Jordan's murder conviction involving Jam Master Jay, ruling that there was insufficient evidence about motive. Was it really related to a drug deal gone wrong? The judge didn't buy it. Jordan was acquitted on the charge of murdering Jam Master Jay, and a request for a retrial was denied. However, Jordan was remanded in custody on drug charges, and that trial is still pending. Prosecutors are now appealing the acquittal ruling, asking that the murder conviction be reinstated. They say the judge erred in his ruling and ignored a substantial amount of evidence implicating Jordan. Oh, and one more twist. On April 27, 2026, Ronald Washington publicly admitted to helping orchestrate the murder of Jam Master Jay. But in this case, he claimed to be the shooter, not Jordan. Prosecutors don't believe him for a second. Bottom line is that while there has been progress, parts of the case remain. We may not receive any final answers if and when the government appeals process goes through. Perhaps the longest unsolved murder in the history of hip-hop is that of Tupac Shakur, who was gunned down in a drive-by at an intersection in Las Vegas on September 6, 1996. He was the passenger in a BMW sedan driven by Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. At 11:15 that night, a late-model Cadillac pulled up next to the Beamer at a stoplight on the passenger side. Someone, apparently from the back seat, opened fire. Pac was hit 4 times. He died of his injuries 6 days later, on September 13, 1994. So, who pulled the trigger? We now have a few possible answers. The main suspect is Dwayne Keefe D. Davis. In 2019, he wrote a memoir entitled Compton Street Legend. Careful reading seems to suggest that Davis incriminated himself in the book. He also gave many interviews over the years about Pac's death, and he may have slipped up once or twice there, too. Davis says it was his nephew Orlando Baby Lane Anderson who pulled the trigger. It was Anderson who got into that fight with rival gang members at the MGM Grand after the Mike Tyson fight earlier that evening. Davis was in Anderson's car, that late model Caddy, on the night of the shooting. Anderson had always denied any involvement, but we'll never know because he was killed in a shooting in Compton in 1998. There were 2 other men in the Caddy that night. DeAndre Freaky Smith. He was in the back seat next to Anderson. There is some evidence to suggest that he might have leaned over Anderson to fire the shots, but we'll never know because he died in 2004. And then there was Terrence Bubble Up Brown. He was the driver of the caddy, and he was found dead of gunshot wounds in Compton in 2015, so he'll never talk either. Davis is the only survivor. Davis ended up being charged with first-degree murder in Tupac's death. On December 29, 2023, he was arrested at his home in Las Vegas as the result of a search warrant investigation at his wife's house. He's been held without bail ever since. On November 2, 2023, he pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors say he orchestrated the shooting and provided the gun. The motive was in retaliation for that fight that took place at the MGM Grand after the Mike Tyson fight. Trying Davis for the murder has suffered plenty of setbacks. The first trial was supposed to start on June 3, 2024. Then it was pushed back to November 4, 2024. An appeal was filed to the Nevada Supreme Court to dismiss the murder charges in January 2025, but that didn't work. Then Davis switched attorneys, which meant another postponement to February 9, 2026. His new defense team needed time to sort through decades' worth of evidence. Indications are that they are pursuing testimony of a new witness, a private detective who will swear that Davis wasn't even in Las Vegas on the night of the shooting, September 6, 1994. They also think they have evidence that Tupac was in stable condition after the shooting and that he died of causes other than being shot 4 times. They want to talk to medical and forensic experts on possible alternative causes of death. In other words, if Pac died of something else other than a hail of bullets, well, then it's not first-degree murder, is it? As I sit here in the summer of 2026, Davis is still incarcerated at the High State Prison in Nevada, serving a sentence related to a jailhouse fight in April 2025. His trial is scheduled to begin on August 10, 2026, which is about a month short of 30 years since Tupac died. Coming next, a rock star who browsed the wrong websites, and the final conclusion of the sick and sordid tale of Ian Watkins, the former lead singer of Lost Prophets. On a Saturday morning in January 2003, London woke up to a front-page story in The Sun, one of the city's tabloids. The headline read, "Rock legend faces kiddie porn probe." The rock star in question was Pete Townsend of The Who. This story was a media sensation, but then it all sort of went away, and now very few people talk about it, if at all. What happened, and what was the outcome? The story in The Sun said that Townsend's name was on the list with 7,271 other people allegedly to have downloaded child porn images. Townsend was horrified, and by noon that day, he gave a statement to reporters outside his London home. Yes, he was on that list, but no, he wasn't some sick pedophile. Here's the story. Growing up, Pete had been the victim of child abuse and was assaulted by his grandmother. As he was working on his autobiography, a book that would eventually carry the title Who I Am, he wanted to try to understand why such horrible things had happened to him. Why would his grandmother treat him in such a horrible way? What were the experiences of other sexually abused children like him? He carried out some of his research online. Searching the internet, and remember this is 2003 when being online was still very much the wild, unregulated West, he ran across child porn sites a couple of times. He says this happened while casually surfing with his son. He was looking for information on this world, these sick people. On one occasion, he used a credit card to enter one site. What he saw, he said, repelled me and shocked me to my very core. He did not download anything. What happened was that this turned him into even more of an advocate for victims of abuse, something he later called the White Knight Syndrome. Here's a quote from Pete. "I had some creepy experiences as a child. So you can imagine, what if I were a girl of 9 or 10 and my uncle raped me every week? I felt if I had an understanding, I could help." This is something that he obviously carried with him for decades. Remember the characters of Cousin Kevin and Uncle Ernie in the story of The Who's Tommy? Entering his credit card number into this site, he said, was a way to prove the credit card companies were processing payments to these sites. That was his motive. Nevertheless, there was a 4-month investigation, and Pete was officially cleared of everything on May 7, 2003. There were and never had been any downloaded child porn images on any of his computers. Here's a statement from Pete. The police have conditionally accepted that these were my motives in looking at this site and that there was no other nefarious purpose. I accept that I was wrong to access this site, and by doing so, I broke the law. However, he wasn't completely off the hook. Townsend was placed on a sex offenders registry for 5 years. This was part of an official caution from police for accessing a child porn site in the first place. He might have escaped that, but Pete refused to go to court. Here's his explanation. A forensic investigator found that I hadn't entered the website, but nonetheless, by the time the charges came to be presented to me, it was 5 months. I was exhausted. I felt that if I went to court, I would be offering myself up for sacrifice. He also told the BBC that he lacked the courage and strength to appear before a judge. Meanwhile, he had to pay upwards of $3,000 a day for extra security because of all the threats he was getting. In his autobiography, he wrote, "If I had a gun, I would have shot myself. It really did feel like a lynching." It didn't help that some British papers ran his picture next to disgraced rock star Gary Glitter, who was a convicted pedophile. So to be clear, Pete Townsend has been cleared of ever doing anything illegal involving this child porn issue. He did nothing. But the stigma still lingers for some who don't know the whole story. There was an upside to this. The stress prompted a visit to a doctor for a full medical exam. This exam turned up a cancerous polyp in his bowel, something that might have killed him had it not been found and treated.
Let's end with a true monster. And before I get into it, I just want to warn you that some of what you're about to hear is truly disturbing and shocking.
The child abuse case against Ian Watkins is nothing short of just unbelievably horrific. Watkins was the lead singer of Lost Prophets, a very successful Welsh band from the early 2000s. Professionally, Watkins had it good. Lost Prophets had 11 top 10 hits in the UK. Their first 3 albums went platinum in the UK, and their second, a record called Start Something, sold in platinum numbers in the US. The band also had a long string of industry awards. Then, on December 19, 2012, Watkins was arrested and charged with 13 sexual offenses against children. That included the attempted rape of a 1-year-old baby. He denied the charges, but there were plenty of signs. What perversions he was into in his private life was apparently news to the band. They found out at the same time as everyone else did, by reading the papers. Watkins was, as they stated, a constant miserable challenge, but they had never imagined him capable of behavior of the time he has now admitted. The band broke up. The trial was swift. It began on November 26, 2013, and on the second day of the trial, after a jury had been sworn in, Watkins pleaded guilty to the charge of attempted rape and sexual assault of a child under 13. He also pleaded guilty to 3 counts of sexual assault involving children, 7 counts of making child porn, and 1 charge involving a sexual act on an animal. Watkins also admitted to attempting to rape an 11-month-old baby boy with the help of the child's mother. And he was in contact with a second woman with plans to rape her baby daughter. There was also an R. Kelly-like sexual encounter with a 16-year-old fan. On December 18, 2013, Watkins received a sentence of 29 years in prison. There was a possibility of parole after 2/3 of the time had passed, so that would have seen him on the streets again in 2031. Let me read you what Justice John Royce said. Those who have appeared in these courts over many years see a large number of horrific cases. This case, however, breaks new ground. He also used terms like insatiable lust, complete lack of remorse, and corrupting influence. The lead investigator called him a committed, organized pedophile and potentially the most dangerous sex offender I have ever seen. The 2 female fans, known in court as Woman B and Woman P, to protect the identity of their kids, were also sentenced to long jail terms. Watkins was transferred to Her Majesty's Prison Wakefield, a high-security facility in West Yorkshire known as Monster Mansion because of its population of high-risk sexual offenders, known as Category A. Watkins was among the approximately 140 Category A criminals in the general population. Watkins was not exactly a model prisoner. He was scruffy with thinning black hair. He was described as lazy and would often refuse to do his assigned prison duties. He preferred to sit in his cell drinking tea. Watkins did not stop with his perversions either. In 2017, it was discovered that he was trying to groom a 21-year-old mother, a longtime fan, who claimed to be in love with him. She had a 2-year-old daughter. Once that was discovered, the child was put into protective social services. In March 2018, Watkins was found to have a mobile phone in his cell, which he used to call his girlfriend. Yeah, he had a girlfriend. That was against prison rules, of course, and he was sentenced to an additional 10 months in jail. On August 5th, 2013, there was a hostage situation at Wakefield. 3 inmates grabbed Watkins and held him because he owed 600 pounds in a drug debt to another prisoner. He was stabbed with a sharpened toilet brush, but none of the wounds were life-threatening, and he was freed after about 6 hours. From then on, Watkins had to pay other inmates to protect him, using money sent directly to the bank accounts of those prisoners. It's unknown how much was spent buying this protection, but it seems to have been a substantial amount. Wakefield is a terrifying place with its history going all the way back to 1594. In the summer of 2025, there was a surprise inspection by prison authorities. It found that there was a dangerous number of assaults happening on a regular basis. Older prisoners convicted of sex crimes felt especially unsafe because of threats from younger sex criminals. Staffing was inadequate, making things even worse. Given what he'd done, Watkins knew he was in constant danger, hence the protection money. And once he started paying, everyone wanted to be paid by this rich rock star, otherwise he'd have, quote, his head cracked open. That same summer, 2025, it was advised that Watkins stay in isolation in his cell in C Wing, where he'd been living for 10 years after threatening letters were discovered. It didn't work. At 9:19 on the morning of October 11th, 2025, just after cells were open for the day, CCTV captured a prisoner named Rico Goodell entering Watkins' cell. Strangely, he had just been reassigned a cell in C Wing, the one right next door to Watkins. So it was a short walk for Goodell. As usual, Watkins remained inside his cell. Goodell was inside for about 20 seconds. When he emerged, he handed something to another prisoner named Samuel Dodsworth, who was in jail for abduction and rape. During those 20 seconds, Goodell stabbed Watkins 3 times in the head and neck with a homemade knife. Watkins staggered out of his cell, clutching his neck, and fell down. He was taken back to his bed in his cell, and officers tried to control the bleeding with a towel while medical personnel were summoned. Goodell went up to a guard. "Who did this?" the guard asked. Goodell replied, "God." "If I've killed him," he said, "you could be talking to someone famous." As he was being escorted away, Goodell turned back to the cell and said, "Have a good night's sleep, Watkins lad." He then turned to the guard. "If I'm going to do life for murder, I'm going to make sure it's worth it." He was already serving a 27-year sentence for murder. Goodell was positively giddy. The prison immediately went into lockdown. There were reports of prisoners cheering when they heard the news. One inmate said nobody felt sorry for him. Everyone knew what he'd done, and they saw it as justice finally being served. And there was nothing that could be done for Watkins. One of the wounds was 4 inches long and slashed through both his voice box and his jugular vein. Watkins was dead by 10:15 a.m. When interviewed later, Goodell said that he was jealous because pedophile prisoners, in his opinion, were treated like royalty by the jail. Both Goodell and Samuel Dodsworth pleaded not guilty to murder. 2 other men were charged on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. The trials are set for February 8th, 2027. Those are updates to some of the stories that we've covered here through the first 66 episodes of Uncharted. When new updates are required, I will be sure to cover them right here. And if you're curious about the final outcomes of some music crime cases, let me know through alan@alancross.ca, and I will try and follow up. There are dozens of Uncharted podcasts available for download. Go ahead and grab them wherever you get your podcasts. There's my other show too, The Ongoing History of New Music. There are hundreds and hundreds of episodes available of that show. I'm always updating my website at ajournalofmusicalthings.com. It comes with a free daily newsletter that I think you'll find useful. And like I said, if you ever need to reach me about anything, drop an email to alan@alancross.ca. Technical production for Uncharted, Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry is by Rob Johnston. Talk to you next time. I'm Alan Cross.